Let's talk about the issues that you are likely to confront in the presidency. The ongoing wars in the Middle East, for instance. What would you do about what's going on in Syria?
Well, first of all, recognize that Syria is an extraordinarily complex place. You know, we've got the Russians in there, you've got the Chinese in there, you've got multiple different factions in there, and you know, you've got ISIS in there, and they're fighting against the Free Syrian Rebels. You know, they're fighting against the Arab Sunni moderates, the Iraqi Syri forces. They're fighting against Israel. And we ought to take note of the fact that they're fighting so many different factions, decide how we can work in a way that is disadvantage to them, knowing that they're fighting all of these different factions. That's the kind of strategy that we need. But we also need to recognize that it's not just Syria. We have to realize that we're dealing with a global jihad movement. ISIS is an important part of that. And the whole idea of a caliphate is very, very important to them, particularly in terms of their recruiting efforts.
Yeah.
Therefore, we need to make them look like losers and not like winners. So we need to be looking at strategies for disassembling the caliphate that they have already established,
right,
with half of Iraq,
and
a third of Syria, with footholds in Somalia, in Nigeria, in Tunisia.
And how would you do that, Dr. Carson? I mean, how would you get around containing them?
Well, we need to use every resource available to us, including our financial resources. We need to try to strangulate them in terms of oil resources. For instance, you look at all the oil outside of Anbar in Iraq. You know, those areas are controlled by ISIS right now. We don't have to allow them to continue to control those areas. And it may require that we use some of our own forces. But one of the things that I think is unrealistic is for us to sit there and say we need to have a coalition of the people in that area. And
why is that
unrealistic? We'll be able to control them, but that will never happen unless that coalition has a leader. You can't sit there and call for a coalition and then sit on your butt and smoke a cigar.
What about, Dr. Carson, the refugee crisis? What should the U.S. be doing about the people who have had to flee their homes from Syria?
Well, recognize that a large number of them have congregated on the Turkey-Syrian border, where there are a lot of hostilities going on. I would start a no-fly zone there, and I would enforce it. I would make sure that everybody knew that it was happening so as to avoid accidents. But that also helps to separate, the forces, which is much less likely to create an international incident.
Should the U.S. open their doors to more of these refugees?
No. We already have tens of millions of people here who are suffering economically. Why would we bring more, particularly bring in people who could easily be infiltrated with members of global jihad? That would be a silly thing to do.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons...
I think instead we should use some of our resources and some of our expertise to help them get resettled in that area. But the real goal would be to help to moderate what's going on in Syria so they can stay in their own country. Half of the population has been displaced.
I mean, one of the reasons is because, obviously there are the debate in Europe about how many to take in, and they desperately need shelter at the moment. And, I don't have to tell you, of course, that the Bible says, welcome the stranger. It's Matthew 24:41 that says, we cannot say to those in need, you are not our problem.
Yeah, but the Bible also talks about being wise. You don't just do stupid things. That would be a stupid thing, to bring in a bunch of people from an area where they would be stupid. The jihadists would be stupid if they didn't infiltrate those people with the kind of people they want to get in here to accomplish their goals.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on and ask you about a videotape of you from last year that has just surfaced. It's been uncovered by the magazine Mother Jones, and it's you giving a speech at the Nixon Presidential Library in which you talk about liberals trying to take over the country. and you talk about your impression of some Americans. So let me play a little clip of that.
They underestimated the intelligence of the American people. The people are not as stupid as they think they are. Many of them are stupid, but, okay. But I'm talking about overall.
So that was obviously a punchline. That got a big joke. But who were you referring to? Which Americans do you think are stupid?
The people, particularly a lot of the people who don't realize what they're doing. For instance, those people who take the disadvantaged people in our country and they say, you poor little thing, I'm going to give you everything that you possibly need. Not recognizing that what that is really doing is keeping those people in a dependent position. That's not helping those people. And all you have to do is look at what's happened since, the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson. We've spent $19 trillion, and we have 10 times more people on food stamps, more people in poverty, more broken homes, out-of-wedlock births, crime, incarceration. Now, everything is not only worse, it's much worse. You have to be kind of stupid to look at that and not realize that that's a failure and to say, we just didn't do enough of it. That's what I call stupid.
So just to be clear, people who support food stamps or Medicaid or
I
welfare.
didn't say that. Now you're trying to put words in my
No,
mouth.
I'm trying to clarify.
Why do you do that?
I want
Why
to
not?
clarify,
Just listen to
Dr.
what I just
Carson,
told you.
because I think what you're saying are liberals. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that
I can't
liberals,
believe that you used to work on Fox and you've turned into that. I don't believe it.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dr. Carson, because you also said something about Fox News that I'd like to play from that very same speech. Let's play that clip about your thoughts on Fox News.
Even if all the media tries to shut you down, which they have tried very much to do with me, but they can't because the good Lord has provided me with mechanisms like my syndicated column and like Fox News. We'd be Cuba if there were no Fox News.
Now, as you point out, I did work at Fox for many years, and I do have many friends there still who are excellent journalists, but I'm not sure that even they think that without their reporting that we would be Cuba. You mean that if Fox News didn't exist, we would be a communist country?
No. Again, there you go with sensationalism. That's what you try to do. And you hope that somehow that will resonate with people who don't think for themselves.
Dr. Carson, you said it. I'm actually
people
quoting
are a
you.
lot smarter than you think they are. They're a lot smarter, and they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Dr. Carson, I'm actually quoting, I'm not even quoting you, I'm playing your words. You are the person who said that there are a lot of people who are stupid and that without Fox News, we would be Cuba.
Are you honestly telling me that you didn't know what I was talking about when I said that? Are you honestly telling me that? Because if you are, you might fit in that category.
Dr. Carson, I really don't know what you're talking about. Fox News came to dominance in 2001. You think before 2001, the U.S. was a communist country?
That's not what I said, but that's what you guys love to do. Why do you do that?
Dr.
What
Carson,
I'm saying, listen, let me explain it to you.
Please.
What I am saying is that the general mainstream media all seems to move in the secular progressive direction. And, they would like to create a narrative that certain things are good and certain things are bad, according to the way that they see them. And by being able to be the bully pulpit, so to speak, and to be the only voice that's out there, you can get a lot of people to start thinking the way that you do. Now, along comes Fox News and presents an alternative, a different way of thinking. And if we didn't have that counterbalance, I wish we didn't need that counterbalance, because the way it's supposed to work is that the media is supposed to be neutral and they're supposed to be on the side of the people, and that is the reason that they are the only business that is protected by the United States Constitution. But because they have become very partisan and very ideological, you need to have a counterbalance, and that's what I mean, having Fox come in to counterbalance what you've done. Some others have come in and joined since that time, and it's good that they have, but it's unfortunate that that has to happen.